It was Christmas Eve, 1945, in Fayetteville, West Virginia, a night like so many others in the small, tight-knit town. Snow blanketed the ground, muffling the sounds of the world outside. Inside the Sodder home, the atmosphere was warm and bustling. George Sodder and his wife Jenny were preparing for the holiday, surrounded by their 10 children. The house was filled with the smell of baked goods and the sound of laughter as the children played near the Christmas tree. It was a moment of peace, a snapshot of family life that felt timeless. George and Jenny had built a good life for themselves. Immigrants from Italy, they had worked tirelessly to create a stable home. George ran a successful trucking business, and Jenny managed the household with unwavering dedication. They were well respected in the community, though George's outspoken political views occasionally caused friction. He was a staunch critic of Benito Mussolini, and his vocal opposition to the dictator had earned him both allies and enemies among the local Italian immigrant community. The children were especially excited that night, their minds filled with the promise of gifts and the magic of Christmas morning. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, the younger children, begged their mother to let them stay up late. Jenny agreed, reminding them to lock the doors and turn off the lights before going to bed. As the older siblings and parents retired upstairs, the younger children remained in the living room, their laughter gradually giving way to the quiet of the late hour. Around 12:30 a.m., Jenny was stirred from sleep by an odd noise. It sounded like a heavy object hitting the roof, followed by a strange rolling sound. She lay in bed for a moment, listening, but when the house fell silent again, she convinced herself it was nothing and drifted back to sleep. Less than an hour later, she woke again to the unmistakable smell of smoke. Panic surged through her as she shook George awake and rushed to the hallway. Flames were already spreading through the lower part of the house. George and Jenny scrambled to wake their children, shouting over the roar of the fire. They managed to gather Sylvia, their youngest, and 3 of the older siblings, Marion, George Jr., and John. But 5 of their children were still trapped inside. The family's attempts to rescue the children were met with a series of inexplicable obstacles. George ran outside to grab the ladder he always kept propped against the house, only to find it missing. Desperate, he tried to start his trucks to drive them closer to the house and climb on top, but neither vehicle would start, even though they had been working perfectly earlier that day. Jenny and the older children attempted to draw water from a barrel, but the water was frozen solid. It was as if every avenue of escape had been deliberately cut off. As the fire raged, neighbors gathered, drawn by the glow and the commotion. Someone tried to call the fire department, but the operator didn't answer. It wasn't until later that morning that the fire chief arrived, long after the house had been reduced to smoldering rubble. George and Jenny could do nothing but watch helplessly as their home and their children were consumed by the flames. When the fire finally burned out, George and Jenny searched the ashes, expecting to find the remains of their children. But as they sifted through the debris, they found nothing. No bones, no flesh, no trace of the 5 missing children. The fire chief suggested that the fire had burned hot enough to completely incinerate their bodies, but this explanation made little sense. Even in extreme fires, human bones almost always survive. Jenny, unable to accept this explanation, began conducting her own experiments. She burned animal bones in her kitchen stove, observing how they reacted to prolonged heat. No matter how long she burned them, the bones never disintegrated completely. Experts later confirmed that it was highly unlikely for a fire, even one as intense as the Sodder blaze, to leave no trace of human remains. The mystery deepened as strange details came to light. The family discovered that their phone line had been cut, not damaged by the fire as initially thought. A neighbor reported seeing a man tampering with the electrical box outside the house shortly before the fire. And then there were the eyewitness accounts. A woman claimed to have seen the missing children in a car driving away from the house during the fire. Days later, another witness reported seeing them at a hotel in Charleston, West Virginia. They were accompanied by 2 men and a woman who seemed to be controlling them. These clues led George and Jenny to a chilling conclusion. Their children had been kidnapped, and the fire had been set as a cover-up. But who would commit such a heinous act? and why? The Sodders had no shortage of theories. George's outspoken opposition to Mussolini had earned him enemies, and he believed that his political views might have made his family a target. Others speculated that the children had been taken by an organized crime ring, possibly for ransom or trafficking. Refusing to give up, the Sodders launched a relentless search for their missing children. They distributed flyers, offered a $5,000 reward, and even hired private investigators. One investigator discovered that the ladder George had been searching for on the night of the fire had been found in a ditch some distance from the house. Another reported seeing the missing children in Florida, though this lead ultimately went nowhere. In 1949, the Sodders took the extraordinary step of exhuming the site of their home and hiring a pathologist to examine the ashes. The pathologist found a few fragments of human vertebrae, but experts later determined that these bones had not been exposed to fire and likely came from a cemetery. This discovery only added to the growing list of anomalies surrounding the case. As the years passed, the Sodders continued their search, driven by a mix of hope and despair. They erected a massive billboard along Route 16, featuring photographs of the missing children and a plea for information. The billboard became a local landmark, a stark reminder of the tragedy and the family's unyielding determination to find the truth. In 1968, more than 2 decades after the fire, Jenny received a letter in the mail. The envelope had no return address, and the postmark was from Kentucky. Inside was a photograph of a young man who bore a striking resemblance to her son Louis. On the back of the photograph was a cryptic note: Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. ELO boys, A90132 or 35I. The Sodders hired another private investigator to follow this lead, but the investigator disappeared without a trace. The photograph became one of the most tantalizing pieces of evidence in the case. George and Jenny were convinced it was Louis, but without definitive proof, the mystery remained unresolved. Over time, the case of the Sodder children became a legend, a haunting tale that captivated amateur sleuths and professional investigators alike. George passed away in 1969 and Jenny in 1989, still believing that their children were alive somewhere. The surviving Sodder siblings have continued the search, though they have grown more cautious about sharing details of the case. They have expressed frustration with sensationalized theories and the lack of concrete evidence. Today, the case of the Sodder children remains one of the most perplexing, unsolved mysteries in American history. Was it a tragic accident, an act of revenge, or a carefully orchestrated crime? The truth may never be known, but the story continues to resonate, a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the human need for answers.